Welcome to the EMA Sustainability Talk, 50th anniversary of the Limits to Growth. This is a very special EMA Sustainability Talk because it had been organized in cooperation with the Club of Rome. And therefore, we have two very special persons here sitting around the table. First of all, we have the Vice President of the European Parliament, Heidi Hautala, who is also responsible for the eco-management and audit scheme. And then I'm very happy that we have here with us Sandrine Dixson-Declève. She's the co-president of the Club of Rome. And there are three particularities about this EMA Sustainability Talk. First of all, we will not only have one very interesting keynote speaker who is not able for the moment to join, but we will solve the issue as soon as possible. But we will have many very interesting panelists around the table here already. And then, second of all, it won't only be 30 minutes as you are used to it, but we will have 2 hours today. And in these 2 hours, we will have changing panels. If you don't have the time to follow us 2 hours, it's a possibility to watch the recording afterwards or watch it on EMA's net. And third of all, for the first time, there will be the opportunity to ask questions. And these questions can be asked over Slido. To do that, you go to the website of Slido, www.slido.du, and then you have to enter the code of this event. And the code, it's a 7-digit code. And it's actually 2344358. So please note it down if you want to ask questions. I repeat again, 2344358. And I leave that here, so in case somebody wants to show it again. And with that, I give the floor to Heidi.
Yeah, thank you, Franziska, and welcome to the European Parliament. We have really been looking forward to this afternoon because now is the day when we can look back into 1972 to the limits of growth and see how things have moved since then. And whilst it seems that the EU is proving its strengths and in a time of crisis, yet another crisis, maybe a third one, around the corner will be hitting us. So if we think long term, which we absolutely must do, the stability of the economy is slipping through the fingers of the leaders, both in business and government. The climate crisis is real, and the planet and the people deserve better. So the Club of Rome was the one that sounded the alarm 50 years ago with the groundbreaking publication of Limits to Growth. We did not respond quickly enough to that alarm, not at all. Some argue that we have barely responded. We are taking steps forward to remain with 1.5 degrees of warming of the climate, including the EU's ambitious Green Deal. But how do we make sure that this is enough? The Club of Rome continues to be a thought leader and trusted advisor to world leaders. We are very privileged to hear from them today to challenge us and to inspire us. So I am now very happy to introduce the moderator of this event, Sandrine Dixson-Declève, co-president of the Club of Rome. And she divides her time between lecturing, facilitating difficult conversations, and advisory work for the European Commission and several advisory boards. So welcome, Sandrine. Please take over.
Thank you so much, Heidi. And it's such a pleasure for us to be here. I'm here with some of the members of the Club of Rome and, of course, hopefully, our keynote presentation from Dennis Meadows, one of the lead authors of the Club of Rome. As you have so indicated, we are in the midst now of what we call the 3 Cs: COVID, climate, and conflict crises. And these 3 Cs and other tipping points were already predicted in 1972 by the lead authors of the Limits to Growth, a report to the Club of Rome, which was absolutely fundamental in a real wake-up call and also ensuring that actually environmental issues were brought to the forefront. In fact, it was after the Limits to Growth that Maurice Strong, when he opened up the Stockholm Conference, and some of you know that last week was Stockholm Plus 50, indicated that we must start to take into consideration nature and humanity's role within nature, and an understanding actually already in those days of what we call the planetary boundaries. As you so rightly said, we are now coming to almost 1.2 degrees. Our goal is 1.5. And so the work of the Club of Rome and the messages coming out of the Limits to Growth, which were not only focusing on our relationship with nature, but very clearly indicating that we needed new economic systems, that we needed to understand population growth and the way in which humanity was working within an economic and a financial system that was no longer servicing truly their needs. These messages are messages that we have continued to talk about and to bring forward in terms of policy decision-making, but we haven't gone far enough. And so what we're hoping that we can do today is showcase the importance and the urgency of the messaging of the Limits to Growth, to take our fingers off the snooze button of that alarm that already came out quite strongly in 1972, to create inspiration around new systems thinking and the systems thinking that many of our Club of Rome members have been undertaking. It's been their life's work, thinking through new economic and financial models that truly service people, planet, and prosperity. And I would add that to that peace, as we're in the midst of a very strong conflict right on our border, and to highlight the opportunities of strong policy action, but also of collective action, of radical new partnerships between the economists and the scientists and the decision makers that we have in the Club of Rome, the many NGOs, the many scientists and economists that actually are working together to try to unpack the tensions between people, planet, and prosperity, but also move forward with some real solutions in terms of new economic indicators when we talk, for example, of donut economics or well-being economics. Indicators that show us that actually in this time of needing to build resilience to future shocks and stresses, we truly do need to look beyond growth. It's also wonderful to be here in the Parliament because we know that next year there will be a groundbreaking conference on beyond growth, that the European Economic and Social Committee is already working very hard in its report on beyond GDP, and that the European Commission and even Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union speech in 2020 indicated that we needed to co-design a brand new economic and financial system of the future, that we needed to work together to develop a well-being economy for Europeans. Now, clearly, through COVID, and then now through the conflict, our key fear at the Club of Rome is that short-term decision-making and knee-jerk reactions do not enable us to put in place the resilience that's necessary, the shifts and the new paradigm thinking that we need at this time of real transformation to, one, hit our 1.5 degrees, but also to ensure when we see so many people that are below the poverty line, when we see so much inequality, that we actually do develop the systems that we need that will protect people and that will enable us to live soundly within our planetary boundaries. What Aurelio Pache spoke about, and many of those members, originally the authors of the Limits to Growth, was the need to look at the human problématique, to understand the complexity of systems and how those systems interrelate, and to optimize different solutions. So I'm hopeful that today's conversation, and that's what we see it as, with MEPs here in the European Parliament, at a time when actually we've just seen a very important vote on the EU taxonomy, which has actually come back to the original need to make sure that our investment decisions are truly green, at a time when the European Parliament has said that we need a strong emissions trading scheme, that we think through how does that work within a new economic system? How can we build the systems that we need in order to truly enable us to service, as I said, people, planet, prosperity, and peace? So I would like to now, and I need to know whether we've got Dennis Meadows online. So Dennis Meadows, unfortunately, the lead author of The Limits to Growth, is not with us. Maybe I can just have one quick reflection before then I pass it to one of our economists from the Club of Rome, who I'm very pleased, and then we will lead you through the other thought leaders that we have with us today. We need to know in this time of celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Limits to Growth As you see, and you will see, that the panel here is fully gender balanced, that we have a wonderful vice president in the European Parliament and a president who is also female, that we have for the first time ever 2 female co-presidents. But one of the lead authors that we need to also commemorate and think about is the queen of systems thinking, and that is Dana Meadows. Donella Meadows, the wife of Dennis Meadows, was one of those key lead authors and who continued throughout her career to bring forward new thinking around systems approaches, but also on how we could move the bar in terms of shifting our current civilization focused on consumption away from consumption within the planetary boundaries and embrace ourselves as human beings within a broader species. And I just want to take this moment also to commemorate Dana Meadows. So I'm now going to pass to some of our wonderful economists and thought leaders that we have with us today, all members of the Club of Rome. I'd first like to introduce Kate Raworth. Kate, thank you for being with us. Some of you, if you haven't, heard about the incredible work of Kate around donut economics. Clearly an opinion leader. She's a senior associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute and a professor of practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Next to Kate, we have Dr. Ida Kubiszewski. I always torture that name. I'm sorry, Ida.
All good.
She's the Associate Professor at Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University, but also now at University College London. Editor of numerous scientific resources, and author and sits on numerous steering committees and boards. Welcome, Ida.
Thanks, Sandrine.
Next to Ida is Professor Robert Costanza, a leading ecological economist, chair of public policy, also was chair of public policy at Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University, now also at UCL, former distinguished University Professor of Sustainability at Portland State University and founding director of the Gund Institute for Ecological Economics at the University of Vermont. And all the way to my left is Tim Jackson, who's the director of the Center for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity and has written also incredible works about prosperity without growth, and a professor of sustainable development at the University of Surrey. He's well known for his groundbreaking work around prosperity. So let me open up, and again, apologies. WebEx has not allowed us to bring in Dennis Meadows, who originally, by the way, was supposed to be with us, but unfortunately had to go home for health reasons. So I'm going to turn to you, Bob. And I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about why it's so important for us to wean ourselves off consumption and the addiction that we have with growth.
Thanks, Sandrine. And that was a very eloquent introduction. I think you covered a lot of the ground that I think we're all going to be talking about. Limits to Growth was the first global systems dynamics model. It was the first attempt really to look at the whole global system in an integrated way and the dynamics of that system. I think it was really path-breaking in that regard. And I think recognizing the need to look at the whole system, I think, has really come full circle now. That we need to look at how the natural capital, social capital, human capital, built capital, how they interact to produce sustainable well-being, and not only in the short term, but also in the long term, the sustainability of that. And recognizing that, that system consists of humans and the rest of nature. We're all in this complex, integrated system together in a new geologic epoch that's been termed the Anthropocene. So business as usual is really no longer possible in that sort of context. We have to understand and manage that whole interconnected, complex system. The Limits to Growth 50 years ago, I think, recognized many of these problems and predicted many of these problems. And their predictions have actually been shown to be quite spot on over the time period from 1972 when that report came out until the present time. And they also knew, I think, many of the solutions to those problems. the things that we would have had to change in order to get onto a different trajectory, one that was sustainable, desirable, you know, that integrated people, planet, prosperity, and peace, as you were saying. So the question is, why haven't we taken action more quickly than this? What's been holding us back? You know, we've recognized these problems for decades now, and we've recognized and we've known the solutions really for decades as well. I think one of the ways of looking at that is that it's best seen as an addiction, that there are a lot of positive short-term reinforcements that keep us behaving in the ways that we all know are not leading to a better world. So the question becomes, you know, what's the appropriate therapy for this addiction that we're in? And it's been shown, you know, with individuals that, you know, confronting addicts with their problem more and more directly is not necessarily the most productive way to change behavior. It's often counterproductive. So we've looked at, you know, what sort of therapies do work at the individual scale, and can those be sort of scaled up to the societal scale? And, you know, the one therapy that seems to work quite well is something called motivational interviewing, which instead of confronting addicts with their problem, engages them in a discussion of their life goals. You know, what kind of life do they want to achieve? And once that's been established, then that can motivate the change to achieve that life goal. So the obvious analogy at the societal scale is, how do we as a society create this, you know, our life goals, our vision of what we're trying to achieve? I think the Sustainable Development Goal process is a step in that direction. But I think we need to go much further, and I think we need to engage the broader public, you know, all the sectors of society, all of the academic disciplines. And I think that's one of the other things that comes out of systems thinking, is you can't address these problems from the perspective of any one discipline or any one sector. We have to learn how to co-produce and collaborate and build consensus, you know, on the kind of world that we all want. So there is a group now, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, I think, which is trying to bring together all of the individuals, groups, governments that are thinking along those lines, and begin to build that broad consensus about what that vision is, about what we want. And I'm really glad that you mentioned Dana Meadows, a good colleague of mine, and I remember a talk that she gave at a conference in Costa Rica back in 1994, I think it was. And she threw out her agenda, the speech she was going to give, and instead she talked about vision. And she talked about the power of having a positive vision in terms of motivating the kinds of changes that we want. But she also talked about the fact that that vision had to be broadly shared. And so I think our challenge today as a society, as a species, really, is to build that broader vision and communicate it with the general public, and get people to recognize that we can build a better world. We can build a world based on well-being rather than based on just continuing to maximize the growth of GDP, to continue to deplete natural resources, etc. We can build a better world, but I think people have to be bought into that vision. And so I'll turn it over maybe to my yes. colleagues on that. And yeah,
thank you, Bob. That really, I think that motivational entropy is so important. And I mentioned the speech of the European Commission President because actually she had asked for me to give her some motivational but also some deep literature, and I gave her The Limits to Growth before she actually made that speech in the summer of 2019. And what's interesting is she mentions well-being. So Ida, unpack a little bit what that means. What does well-being look like as a new vision? Yeah. And can we link it, and we'll talk about that a bit more, to the European Green Deal vision, which is a social and environmental vision?
Yeah. Thanks, Sandrine. And going off of what Bob said, I think it is important to look at that global scale because we're all living in one system, living on this earth together. But it's important to understand that we also have to look at multiple scales. There's the country scale, which is important. There's the community scale, that's important. There's the neighborhood scale, that's important. And I think by aggregating to the bigger scales, that has a lot of benefits, there's comparisons, there's a global vision, but you also lose a lot of the people that are most at risk, that when looking at their well-being from different aspects, you lose them out, they get aggregated out. So for example, in Australia, the life satisfaction, so it's the self-reported well-being, subjective well-being, is just above 7. And yet, when you look at smaller communities, there are entire communities that are around life satisfaction of 1 or 2. Wow. But those get aggregated out when you start doing averages. And so I think it's important to look at the whole scale. So yes, that 7 point something is important as a comparison to other countries, as a national policy. But it's also important to look at those small scales. And the focus on well-being is critical. So at the end of the day, what's our global goal? What are we trying to achieve? Is the goal to make more money? Why do we need growth? Growth of what, right? So let's say we say, yes, growth is important. People will say growth is important because it helps us create a better economy, which gives jobs, which sustains people. Totally agree. There needs to be jobs, but aren't jobs and maintaining that well-being and maintaining that good sort of life, isn't that the goal? So isn't growth or that money just a path towards a certain goal? And I think it's important not to confuse what the goal is versus an important part potentially of that goal. So if you, for example, have 3 cars, getting a 4th car probably doesn't add to your well-being as much as if you've been taking public transportation or walking to work, can't ever get there because you're spending a lot of time commuting, and getting that first car that helps you have more time with your family, get there quicker. So I think it depends how much that dollar or euro adds to your well-being, and that's the ultimate goal, is that well-being. And I think it's important. We currently focus a lot on GDP, and that's been sort of our measure of progress in a lot of circles, at the national level, subnational level, global level. And it's important in certain ways and in certain contexts, but it's not a good measure of progress. And it's important to remember when it was created originally. It was created after the Great Depression in the US. It was created after World War II, where a lot of Europe was in shambles. And it needed that rebuilding, and we needed to track how the economy was doing. We're not living in that world anymore. We're 70 years out of that world. So why are we still using the same measure as we were back then when we didn't have computers that fit, on our desktops, when the same kind of computing power required a room or 2? And we couldn't collect that data. We're so much further than that. So why are we still using all that same information? And GDP has a lot of issues. GDP, for example, considers everything positive. There's an oil spill, GDP goes up. There's a war in Ukraine. For now, it's going down. Eventually, they'll have to rebuild. GDP will go up. Can anybody say that that war or an oil spill are actually positive things? So if you look at a lot of measures and track them against GDP, you see that as GDP has been going out, a lot of the other measures that try to correct GDP have leveled off. And that's a lot due to environmental costs that are counted as positive, that's one, and 2, inequality. GDP doesn't care whether one person owns all the money in the world or if it's equally distributed. It's just the same. And it leaves out a lot of really important things too. Volunteer work, having your own garden, a parent staying home with their kids.
The parallel economy.
The informal economy, the parallel economy, it leaves all of that out. And yet, in certain countries, it's more than 50% of the economy. It's critical, and yet GDP lives out. So we need to move one step beyond that. It's not about growth. It's about what it leads to. So let's defocus the path and refocus on the actual goal. And so looking at multiple scales is critical, but it's important to look at, and you kind of mentioned this, looking at the long time scale as well. Because making a decision for tomorrow is great, but it can lead you in the wrong direction because it can be reactionary. You have to look at the 50, 100 years out. Society will still exist. We won't be here, but society will be. And so what do we make sure that our kids and our grandkids we leave behind? We have to look, you mentioned the 3 C's. I hadn't actually heard that. I really like it, but COVID, climate, and conflict. If you look at them, they're actually the same issue.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing. And so looking at all of this as one big system, it's the same problem, just looking from different symptoms of the same virus kind of thing, of the same addiction. So how do we tackle the addiction or the virus instead of trying to tackle the symptoms? So.
Thank you. No, I think that's really helpful, Ida. And it leads us to how then do we really start to look at that virus? Right. What does that actually mean? As you were saying, and Bob Kennedy gave his brilliant speech, obviously, in 1968, and I always repeat it, and for those of you who don't know, please Google it. It is the most brilliant speech, and it shows how we have just not listened to not only the limits to growth, but some of those leaders who already understood in the late 60s and the early 70s that our economy was going completely in the wrong direction, that it wasn't placing a value on what was most important. And now that we're in the midst of this Ukrainian conflict and we're coming out slowly of COVID, but COVID is still here, we should be tapping into people's consciousness who have understood somewhere that actually we have to come back to what's most essential. And so I want to turn now to you, Tim, because you've spoken about prosperity, and Ida brought up this inequity issue. And growth for the wrong reasons does not enable prosperity across the board. So how is it that we start to really think through that vision of well-being, that understanding of what real prosperity means, in particular when we know, and we've seen now through Earth for All, and all of you sat on the Transformational Economics Commission, that the wealth is going up in certain countries, well-being is going down systematically. There is a huge gap between the two.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm glad you brought up that quote from Bobby Kennedy. The GDP measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our passion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it's a fantastic speech, and it was 4 years before the Club of Rome, and before that report was published. And I can just see on the monitor that we've actually got Dennis here, and I think we should probably maybe take a break while we hear Dennis's contribution to this. And then I'll come back and say something about the practical measures after that.
Thank you, Tim.
I'd love to know from Dennis, actually, whether he was aware of that Kansas speech and what he thought about it 4 years before they published the limits to growth.
What a great question. Dennis, can you hear us? Just been having a bit of a discussion around the limits to growth in your absence. And I know that you have a beautiful presentation for us, so why don't we allow you to go forward, and then we can continue the conversation, because you are the man of the hour, my friend.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I'm going to trust the technical support team to call up my first slide, which is black. And when you see that, I can start.
It's on. It's on from what I understand. We can't see it, but everybody else can. So you go for it.
Okay, so next, this should be the title for my talk, Putting Limits to Growth into Historical Context. So go back one.
We've got your title slide on the.
Okay, fine. So next, this is a presentation to you guys. I've been waiting for this for some time. Thank you very much for the invitation. In thinking back on limits to growth over the last 50 years, I remember the first time that I made a presentation publicly about our research. That's me standing up at the podium at the Smithsonian Institution, March 2nd, 1972. Some of you will recognize on my right Aurelio Pache, who was the founder and the president of the Club of Rome, and others at the podium are my team. A key person, Donella, co-author of the report and head of the population group, was peeking around just to my left. There you see her head sticking around the podium. So I was terrified at this meeting. I thought everything I had to say was going to be so boring. All the ambassadors and ministers and so forth out and journalists out in the audience would be just thinking it was a waste of their time. But of course, 50 years later, we see that the basic ideas of limits to growth still aren't accepted. Next. We created, over a 2-year period, with the support of the Club of Rome and MIT, a group of 16 that I put together, a simple world model which helped to understand the long-term causes and consequences of physical growth on the planet. It was designed to help a Club of Rome understand its so-called problematique, this interconnected nest of serious problems. Our model was very simple because you can't actually say very much about what will be invariant over a 200-year period on the globe. Next. The first sector was population. Then above that to the right, a very simple resource sector. We didn't even differentiate between fossil fuels and non-renewable resources. A serious problem, I think, but not one that increases of course, coming into focus now with the looming food shortage. And finally, the reported on these results in 3 the collected papers, and then finally the book that was actually requested by the Club of Rome, our scientific report. The limits was a kind of an afterthought. It was for us simply an effort to explain the basic concepts. The scientific effort went into preparing the 1974 report. So of course, 50 years later, we see that the introductory text received all the attention and nobody ever really, I think, bothered to read our scientific work. Those who criticized our work predict the future, because you can't do that in a system where humans are acting. But we did lay out a set of scenarios, different possibilities we thought might occur on the planet over the next 150 years, depending on one of them characterized a prosperous, equitable, more or less sustainable planet. Next slide, please. There we go. Click it again. Okay, so that shows what is one of a family of so-called sustainable futures. The opposite, if people didn't take their issues into account, next slide, please, would be, click it again, yeah, would be one in which the policies being pursued in 1972 did continue to produce growth, but finally they hit limits, and then of course the result is very different. We didn't know which of these would occur, but by Graham Turner and others have done this, suggested that this so-called standard run was pretty much the one that seemed to be people seem to be following. And so now we are here at 2022. In our scenarios, at least, some of the major physical growth curves are starting to peak over, and we're entering into really a new phase of social development. So what's the difference between these two? Next slide, please. For a transition to a more sustainable future, we have to learn how to solve two different kinds of problems. Easy problems, where actions now make things look good soon and then solve it later, versus difficult problems where constructive action now makes things look worse before giving you better results in the future. Next slide, please. Here's a characteristic of an easy problem. You take action going from a goal on the lower left to something better in the upper right, and click next slide, or next click, please. The next evaluation, say next election, comes at a time when people can at least report progress. Most politicians, most economists would be proud and certainly eager to pursue this kind of problem. And in fact, by and large, the thousands of easy problems that we confront are being dealt with our current system. The problem is not the easy, but the difficult problems. Next slide. The difficult problems are quite today. Here again, we're trying to get from a low goal on the left to a high goal on the right, but there's two different modes of action. The one shown here in red gives you better at first, but then makes things worse. That's, for example, trying to solve the energy crisis by subsidizing energy prices in the short term. Everybody thinks they're getting better off, but finally it stimulates demand, retards innovation, and you're much worse off in the long term. Alternatively, with a different kind of policy, next please, you could make things appear worse in the short term, but finally solve them in the long term. Climate change, unfortunately, has also this attribute. So here are some examples. Next slide. Easy problems, air pollution, hunger, deforestation, litter, etc. It's not to say that it's simple to solve these, but their characteristics permit us to make progress. And by and large, humanity has made progress on these problems, certainly in the rich countries, which can afford to have a somewhat longer time horizon. The difficult problems, we really haven't made much progress. Pandemics, climate change, fossil fuel depletion, restructuring the social support system to deal with the declining population, migration. These are issues where our current systems simply have not yet come in to meet the challenges. So what are we going to have to do? Well, it's the last slide. To solve difficult problems, and this, of course, is what the Club of Rome is now working to gain traction on for the future. First, we need a longer-term planning horizon. We need to look much further out in putting our costs and benefits together when choosing action. And we need, and this is really crucial, we need an attractive, feasible goal for society. I think it's becoming clear that this notion, this fantasy of sustainable development, where everybody gets richer and the poor catch up with the rich, and we cure all of our environmental problems, it's a fantasy. We need something else that people can believe in, but which is attractive. Degrowth, for example, is dealing with the right issues, but it's presenting a negative future. It's against things, and it's, as a consequence, I think, not going to become very politically effective. I propose an alternative. Let's call it the mature society. When your kid is growing up, the first few years you're happy about physical growth, but after they get to be 10, 12 years old, you want them to quit growing physically and start growing psychologically, socially, and culturally. Well, I think that's time now for the human society as a whole. Let's strive for a mature society, one that's fully grown in its prime. It won't be utopia, but it could be one that deals with many of the common problems. A nice thing about this notion is that it translates well. I looked up in Spanish, French, Italian, and la société mature is something which captures the meaning of this. Next, please. Next click. Thank you. Well, there's much to be done, but if we can adopt a positive image and understand we're dealing with difficult problems, I think we can make progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And I truly wish that you could be here. And I loved your conclusion, because I think we're coming to a very similar space and a very similar discussion here as well. That mature society that actually reflects growth in a very different way. And I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Dennis, but I wanted to continue also with Tim. And Tim, you threw out that very important quote of the speech from Bob Kennedy, where actually I think there he was also talking about the elements of a mature society who place a value on what's truly important. And Jane Goodall has always told us that we are the most intelligent species, but we're not the wisest. So maybe this comes together in terms of some of what you were going to start saying around what does real prosperity mean for today's mature society?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the question, Sandrine. And I really like that bouncing off that idea of a mature society, asking the question, you know, what is prosperity? What does prosperity mean in practice? And of course, if you choose one thing that it means, prosperity means wealth, then you end up with one set of policies and one set of governments and one set of businesses and one set of investment portfolios and one set of people, mindsets. And if you choose something different, if you choose to concentrate on something different, then you could end up in a totally different place. And it's very interesting when you ask people what prosperity means to them. Very often the first thing they talk about is health. And prosperity as health is a very, very different thing from prosperity as wealth. And I would argue for Dennis that actually health at a certain point does indeed capture that idea that you move from something that's growing to something that's being mature, and you want health all through that journey. You want it from beginning to end. You want it for your kids. You want it for your old people. And you don't just want it in physical terms. You want mental health. You want cultural health. You want the health of your environment. But it gives you that metaphor of prosperity as health, gives you a very, very different starting point from prosperity as wealth, because wealth means growth. It means incentivizing business to make more profit, to invest those profits, to make greater returns, for those greater returns to make more people rich into the future. And so you end up with today's divided society, which has focused all its policies, all its ingenuity, all its technologies on the creation of wealth. And it's sidelined, literally undervalued, devalued, underpaid, and put them in the periphery of society, all the people who matter in terms of prosperity as health. The carers, the care worker, the hospital, the doctor, the educator, the social care, the people who are renovating and refurbishing, the people who are maintaining, the people who are working in craftsman-like ways to create things that last over time. This is an economy which has health as its metaphor instead of wealth. But it's very, very difficult to find. If you're fixated on wealth, you're fixated on growth all the time. More is always better. But the trouble is you miss that point at which actually more doesn't become better. It becomes worse, at least for somebody, and sometimes for all of us. And so actually that's the shift that has to happen. It has to happen, you know, within our debates. It has to happen at the cultural level. It already is happening, I would argue, at the cultural level. It has to happen in our governments. Thomas Jefferson once said, to kind of finish on another quote, that the care of human health and happiness is the first and only task of government. Have our governments been doing that? They did it momentarily in the crisis when it was brought to our attention that actually, you know, without health, the rest of it really doesn't matter. But they've tried to go as fast as possible back to that wealth creation route. And they're beginning to forget again that fundamental message. Health is about balance. It's about finding the right balance. It's not a place that you can get to by assuming that you grow and grow forever. You have to focus on the minutiae of what it means to be healthy and who is healthy and who looks after us in order that we are healthy. And that's a starting point. It's not the finishing point, but it tells you, it begins to tell you, now I don't invest so much in these clever, fancy technologies that make a few entrepreneurs obscenely rich and they never share their wealth with society. Now we invest in a different place. We invest in care. We invest in the people who work in care. We invest in the technologies of care, the institutions of care. We invest in people. And that gives you a very, very different portfolio, not just of investment, but of policy. And I think it's the vision that Bob and Ida were kind of talking about. When you have that vision, and it's a different vision, it gives you the energy, in fact, to reform your policies, to renegotiate those policies, to invest differently, to create a different portfolio, to work differently. And sometimes, and I'm sure Dennis never did that, to find a careful work-life balance where we're all not just focusing on our own productivity and output, but caring for those around us.
Thank you, Tim. So I really love the direction we're taking. We've shifted from well-being to a mature society, and they're all totally interrelated to prosperity for health and a healthy well-being society rather than prosperity as wealth. And now I think what we're trying to understand, and I'm sure the questions, and some of them are already coming through on the Slido, are how do we then translate this? How do we take this down to the granular level? What does this mean in terms of Europe? What does it mean in terms of member states? What does it mean in terms of communities? And I'm going to turn now to you, Kate, because obviously you're working at the community level and you've really nailed it in terms of the donut. I mean, I think all of us appreciate the thinking of the donut so much. But coming back to Ida's really good point around the disenfranchisement of communities and the fact that we don't take into consideration that parallel economy, which should be the economy, how does the donut start to get back and then get people excited about that vision and that journey and it makes sense to them?
So I want to start by saying I feel really humbled hearing Dennis speak because I'm a little over 50 years old. I was 1 year old when the Limits to Growth report was published. And it's appalling that I'm now a 51-year-old woman and he is still telling us the very message that was in that report, and it still needs to be said. I mean, it's extraordinary how slow we've been. I can't think that he and Dana Meadows and others in the team could have imagined that a baby of their day would be sitting here literally 50 years later and this is still news, that this is still news that we haven't acted on it. So I just find that incredibly, I thank him for his patient stamina to show up again and say it again, which is what we all find ourselves doing. And the question is, when does this break through and actually turn into paradigm change and action? So the concept of the donut, I created it when I saw the planetary boundaries diagram, which had such an impact on me. Visuals, right? I think pictures matter. And it was great that Dennis was showing us these visuals. Our eyes are pattern seekers. And even as we've been talking, what is the shape of progress? The 20th century told us it was this ever-rising line that goes through the ceiling. It's exponential growth. And our politicians and our economists have spoken in that narrative of more, of acquisition, of increment. And actually, the shape of progress is much closer to what we know in our own bodies as health. Like a heartbeat, right? And the donut actually looks like that. It's leave no one falling in the hole, don't overshoot the limit. Health lies in balance. And if we can reconnect with what we already understand in our own bodies, which is health lies in balance of a delicately balanced, complex system that is the individual human body. If we can take that metaphor and take it to the planetary body, we've given ourselves the best metaphorical chance of landing well. So when my book, Donut Economics, came out, I was really struck by the number of people who came up to me and didn't just say, I like this book. They said, and I'm actually already putting this into practice in my classroom, with my students, in my community, in my town council, in my business. So we set up Donut Economics Action Lab to work with those people who want to act. And our first principle is go where the energy is. Because we can spend our lifetimes trying to move systems, and it's important we do that. And at the same time, let's start with those who are ready to start. So we respond to towns and cities around the world, no matter how big or small. If they come to us and say, we want to put this into practice where we are, let's go. Let's do it. Because you, in your context, have judged that this is a useful tool for you. So let's go. And it actually brings together a lot of what people who have been talking about. Bob talking about, this the motivational interviewing. What are your, dear addict, if we're going to get you over this, let's not talk about what you're addicted to. Let's talk about what you stand for, what are your goals. So we work with towns and cities to say, what do you want to become? What is the future vision of your place that meets the needs of all people within the means of the living planet? What would that look like here? And we start off by creating a portrait of that place. We do it playfully. I mean, the fact that it's called Donut Economics means everybody already turns up with a smile. Everybody knows this is playful. You can bring your humor, even as we tackle the world.
And you can eat donuts.
You can eat donuts
and
if you want to, and dumplings, and you can have fun, have a laugh. So we work with them to bring this into schools, bring this into the community. What does this transformation look like? How do we move from being degenerative by design to regenerative by design? And I think it's really important that we name where we've come from. Let's name it so we can see it, so we can see the water we swam in. It was linear degenerative industrial systems. And we must name what we want to be. We can't just talk about moving away from the... We want to become regenerative. We have inherited divisive systems. We want distributive systems. So I'm really into finding the language and the pictures to make it simple, compelling, and unforgettable, and irresistible to be part of this transition. What we're finding is with the places that want to move, and I'm talking about cities like Amsterdam that have used the donut to define their policy on circularity, cities like Barcelona, where I've just been, currently creating a city portrait to shape and give a vision and a picture to an ambition they've already got, right? It's not, it doesn't create it. It's an ambition they feel, and they say, let's give it this embodiment in a vision. Cities like Brussels Capital Region are working with this concept. Ipoh in Malaysia, Mexico City, El Monte in Chile. We are working with them and learning from them. How do you get started? How do you actually do this? How do you embed this and bring this in? And of course, there's a certain distance the city can go. There's a certain space they have control over, the infrastructure, the layout of the place. They can turn car lanes into bike lanes. They can introduce different kinds of city taxes. They can sometimes change the regulation on housing and protect themselves from speculative capitalism and platforms that disregard their desire to house their people. But of course, they run into the nation and the region and the world. And so they are trying to be islands of transformation in an untransformed system, and there's only so far they can go. And that's why it has to connect. That's why we need European-level transformation. And at the same time, we always remind these cities that are running further and faster ahead of the region in which they're embedded, what you do is invaluable demonstration. It is invaluable demonstration of proof of practice that this is possible. It gives peer-to-peer inspiration to other cities, but I think it crucially gives peer-to-peer permission. It is time. We've been waiting 50 years. My entire lifetime, we've known this and sat and had reasons and lobbies not to act and not to move, and it's got worse and it's got more critical. Can we please now go? Let's watch and move with the front runners, and let's take inspiration and permission from them and give them a regulatory context and give them a cultural and ambition and a visionary context in which what they are doing as front runners actually becomes the norm and actually ultimately becomes quickly necessary and obvious, and we do this.
Fantastic. And so many themes I want to build on, and some of which are actually coming through the Slido. So I don't know if Dennis is still with us. Wonderful.
Yes.
Yay, Dennis, you're still here. Wonderful. I'm going to ask you and the others a quick question, actually several. So listen well. The first is, are we still hopeful that mainstream economics can make a difference? Or do we totally have to scrap the current main economic system? And I think that also, in taking into consideration planetary boundaries and what you've just said, actually, Kate, is so important. And why do we think there's such a hesitant from decision makers? Why is it that at the community level we can create this excitement and yet it starts to trickle up and then it dies. Is it short-term political decision-making? Is it fear? Is it power-mongering? Is it incumbents? What is it? So I'm going to put that to all of you, and Dennis, I want you to start first.
Let me start by saying I appreciate Kate's initiative very much. I've always thought coupled with a relatively large access to resources. People with children think longer, but they have nothing to work with. And nations have phenomenal amounts of resources, but they're focused on the next election. So it's at the community level I see the potential for real. Really need to adopt a different political culture, one which isn't based on basically fake compromises where some people give up now in order to get more later. Mainstream economics will make a difference, of course. The question is whether it'll make a positive difference.
That is the question. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, is a bit confusing, I think, because, of course, economists range across the board. But all of them are going in order to us.
Absolutely right. So the question then to all of you, what do you think? And maybe I'll start with you, Tim, and then go down this way.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But I don't think we should spend too much time trashing mainstream economics. I think what we should be doing, and it's the same core idea, is building the vision of what economics should be. What is an economics that's fit for purpose? What's an economics that tells us how to live within a finite planet? What's an economics that's not hooked on growth? And we know so little about that because mainstream economics has just taken growth as its rationale, as its raison d'etre, as its central proposition. And so actually what really gives me hope about that is that all the kids who are coming to me as a professor asking, where is this economics? Where can I find this economics? And they've been doing it for not 50 years, unfortunately, Dennis, but definitely for, the last decade or so. And they're beginning to ask the questions that matter. What does economics look like? What does our economy look like when it's not growing all the time? Because actually growth has been declining for 50 years, and soon we're going to be living without it. So we ought to learn how to live in an economy without growth. Yeah. And the first point of that, to me, it goes back to Bob's point about addiction, is to understand your dependency on growth. Where does it live in society? If you link growth to people's jobs, then you're stuffed if you don't have growth. If you link growth to people's health, then you can't protect their health if you're just focusing on growth. Yeah. And so these are things that really have to be untangled, and they have to be untangled by economists, and they have to be untangled by young economists with lots of energy to reconstruct economics in the world that we are moving into. And as I say, those people are there. They are coming to me asking, if you gave me €1 million, I could construct a school of post-growth economics which PhD students would fill tomorrow. And that's how keen a younger generation is to replace that dysfunctional economics with something that accords with the vision of the donut.
So that is our goal. I make that as one of my calls as co-president of the Club of Rome, that I'm going to help you raise that million. So that we can set up a school of PhD.
It wasn't meant to be a fundraiser,
no.
Sorry.
I know it wasn't, but the fact of the matter is we need it.
Bob's the guy to teach it, so.
Well, so we need the teachers, but we also need the place that starts to really transform things. So Bob, what's your thinking?
Well, I agree with what Tim was saying. I think we need to create a new economics that's fit for purpose, and we have been trying to do that for several decades under various terms, including ecological economics, which basically acknowledges that humans are embedded in society, which is embedded in the rest of nature, and that if we're going to manage that system, we have to take the whole system into account. And I think economics is too important to be left to economists as well. So we can't teach economics as a separate discipline that is only concerned with how the market functions and allocation of a certain subset of scarce resources. We have to have an economics that looks at the whole system, and that's not going to be, economics as a narrow discipline in the old format. It's going to be a transdisciplinary effort, and I think that's what ecological economics has always tried to do.
Yeah.
I think there are some changes happening there, but I think it has been slow, and part of it is because of mainstream economists are addicted to their paradigm, and so paradigm shifts require enough anomalies in the system, enough instances of where the model's not working to cause the paradigm to shift. But I think that's certainly happening these days, and hopefully there will be a tipping point where we get over that. And just to make one other point, I think it is critical that new economics is based on the health of the system, and not just the human system, but the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
So the whole planet. You said, people, planet, prosperity. I mean, I think that's the essential thing, and that is the essence of the vision I think we need to overcome this addiction to growth. Herman Daly has always talked about the distinction between growth and development. Growth is increasing the size of the system. Development is improving how it operates, improving its health. And the analogy with organisms, and Dennis's idea about a mature society, I think that's exactly what we're talking about. How do we create a planet? How do we manage this planet in the Anthropocene epoch? In a way that recognizes that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
That's just a ridiculous notion. And we don't want infinite growth. That's not going to actually improve our well-being at any scale.
No. So I'm going to interrupt you so I can go to Ida, because I've been told I have to close, and then we're going to go to the next session. And Ida, I want to bring in the notion of youth as well.
Okay.
Because Tim said we need to shift. And we already know that many young people are part of the shared economy, looking at a totally different economic paradigm, not only wanting to do a PhD in it, but participating in the economy totally differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's true, is that a lot of younger people are looking at this differently because they grew up in a different world. One, they grew up with internet and computers. Two, they grew up in a world that there weren't more and more resources. There was talk about there being less resources, there being restrictions. And so a lot of them look at the world a bit differently. And I don't know if I'd consider myself in one of those youth categories anymore, but I think it is a different mentality of thinking that this is the first generation, my generation is the first generation that is not better off than their parents.
Yeah.
And with that knowledge, I know young people, some of my students, kids of friends who graduated university, got a master's, and haven't been able to find a job just because it's not there. So when university was then a guarantee almost for a good job, that's no longer true. And I think those kids are realizing it, that they can't survive in a world that was created by their parents and their grandparents and so on. That we need a new system because the world has changed, but the system hasn't. And I think we need to do... I do want to mention very briefly your second question of where the hesitancy for policymakers comes from.
Please.
And I thought it was interesting, you said fear, and I think some of it is in terms of somebody gets reelected, and terms are 3, 4, 5 years, depending on country. You get elected, and your first thought is, how do I get reelected?
Yeah. Rather than how do I service my
and how do I
people,
service my population?
Yeah.
And I think we also, from the population, come with this mentality that mistakes are bad. And I think we moved away from the idea that adaptive policymaker and adaptive policies are actually a good thing. Let's implement something, see how it works, go, you know what, I've learned, I'm changing my mind, doing it a little bit differently. I remember one of the first things I remember really clearly Obama saying, because somebody goes, oh, you're just flip-flopping, you're changing your mind. He goes, yes, I've had new information and I've changed my mind. That's a good thing, yes, not a bad thing. And yet, with politicians, that's seen as a really negative thing, to change your mind even if you learn new information. So I think being able to kind of take a step back, saying, I'm going to try this. I think this is the right way to go. Let's learn together and then potentially adjust. Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah. So, thank you for that, Ida. I agree that honesty is so important.
Yeah.
Kate, I'm going to give you the last word.
So today's an important day, right, here, because today the European Commission is realizing it cannot backslide on what counts as green, right? It's time to reject counting gas and nuclear as green. Please, soon, let's have a vote that says wood chip is not a sustainable form of energy. This feels like detail, but actually it's the big picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we set ourselves a long vision of who we want to become. And then when it actually comes to it and actually comes to acting, the old interests, the national, political, industrial interests say, ooh, let's sneak that under the bar. Let's push aside the science for now and let's just be convenient. It's really important that parliaments like this one push back and say, no, we hold the line. Because if we don't hold the line, we will never live up to the work that Dennis and others did. And we will be so ashamed of ourselves for failing in the face of knowing this for so long, for actually just following through on the decisions that matter. So it's really important that we're seeing some pushback against slipping standards today. Let's hold our nerve, hold the line, go for the vision that this decade demands. And that I really liked Dennis's point about community. We all live in community. We all should care about, as Janine Benyus would say, we are not going to be around to care for our children's children's children. What we can do is care for the place that will care for them. And by caring for this living planet in our communities, that is the best thing we can do. So let us have the courage of our convictions and act in line with what the science in these times demand.
Thank you so much, Kate. So let's have the courage of our convictions. And I'm now going to call some MEPs to come around me, and also Maya Gopal, that actually will be coming to us. Unfortunately, she has COVID, so she will be coming also via video. I want to thank you all so much. And I want to remind us as we transition into this next moment that it is, you can now leave the stage. Thank you very much. Do a little jig if you would like to as you depart. And indicate to all of you who are watching us, not only do we need to have courage of our convictions, but let's make sure that we truly do make Jane Goodall proud. I really believe that our biggest challenge is not only to show that we're an intelligent species, but to actually prove that we are wise. Let's actually prove to all the other species in that animal kingdom that we are not idiots as we sit here before you and we move on. Let me also ask you, as the MEPs come to the floor, to not forget to send us your questions. Let me give you the number for Slido. So first of all, it's www.sli.do, and the number is 2344358. And if you want to elect me as president, you can also put in the same. Just kidding. But I've never done that before. So as we move on, I want to welcome very much to the floor my dear Belgian compatriot. Bonjour, mon cher.
Bonjour.
And also, Aurore Laluc. Hello. Un plaisir de vous voir. Merci. French economist and politician of the Place Public Party, who has been serving as a member of the European Parliament since 2019. She co-founded the Veblen Institute, a think tank dedicated to post-growth ideas and proposals. And Philippe Lamberts, who is a Belgian politician serving as a member of the European Parliament, a leader, obviously, and a very prominent member of the Écolo, and the co-president of the Greens European Free Alliance. And I still have with me my dear friend Heidi Hautala, who's vice president of the European Parliament and also a member of the Écolo, the Green Group, and a very important Finnish politician, almost elected as one of the first Greens as president of Finland. Thank you so much for joining me. And I don't know if you were able to see some of the exchange that we had, because it's such a bit of a strange setup here. But what I wanted to do is very much now enter into a conversation. We've heard from Kate and Dennis and Tim and Ida and Bob, all members of the Club of Rome, all prominently very much working on looking at new economic models and understanding what people's needs are and what the planetary needs are. And for that, it's really important that, as Kate said, that we stick to the vision, that we realize that we have to transform. So I also want to bring in Maya. Do we have Maya? Okay, Maya is now joining us. Maya, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I hope it's fine on the way around.
Wonderful. Okay, we can't see you yet, but maybe we can put the volume up a bit. Okay, so continuing on that conversation that we've just had and the challenge that we had from Kate at the end, which was to really stick to our goals, to remember that our goal is as politicians, so your goal is truly to serve as people and planet, because that's our home, and to ensure that we truly do shift towards prosperity, not necessarily with growth. Can I maybe turn to Heidi, as you've been hearing this, and have you open a little bit with your reflections? Okay. And then I'll come to you, Philippe, and to you, Aurore. And then, Maya, I'm going to come to you and ask you a little bit what your challenge is for members of the European Parliament and for decision makers. And we're very sorry that you're not with us.
Yeah, well, I got quite a sort of a strange idea, first of all, to you mentioned that we are in this war crisis, the conflict, the Russian aggression on Ukraine. And when Russian citizens are asked if they support this war, I think a common understanding is that why perhaps 70–80% of them say that they support the war is that they are afraid. They are truly afraid of expressing their views, and they have fears about future and their position, what happens to them. And of course, a lot of things could happen to them in this situation if they express themselves freely. So I was thinking that if we go to our citizens, we ask them, do you really support this growth model? Do you really feel happier now than you felt when you were perhaps a little bit less affluent, a little bit less wealthy? So I could think that a lot of people would have the courage to say, no, this is not anymore what we need. We need to change course in our society, in our economy. But still, I think a large part of the population would be a little bit fearful about what waits for them. And we heard from Dennis that it's not wise to give incentives like subsidizing energy prices in general when we have come to this energy crisis.
And there actually was a question, I'm just going to say. People are wondering, why are we still subsidizing fossil fuels, for example? Why haven't we phased it out?
So I would say that the question is that we need to take care of equity, equality, so that nobody will be left behind with these high energy prices. But it would be a mistake to go on the same path. So where do we find this courage? And then I would say that we need more participatory, more deliberative democracy. We need more popular initiatives. And as Kate and others have said, and I think what we heard, the community is really important. That's where people get empowered, where they get the courage, where we can also share the vision, where that now it's time to create a new purpose for societies, for our lives. And there I would say that it's, again, a question of equity, because there are many people who are sidelined in our societies who don't feel that they have much of a say of anything like vision for the future. So I perhaps leave it to that.
Thank you. And before I come to you, Philippe, maybe a few very key and important statistics. So we did, as the Club of Rome with some other organizations, a G20 survey last year. Coming out of COVID, we asked very clearly two key questions. One is, do you still believe that climate change is the greatest existential threat? 90%. G20, this is not Europe, just Europe. This is G20, so China, India, etc. 90% said yes. Climate change is absolutely fundamental. The other key, 75% said, and the economy is broken. We need to move towards a well-being economy. So why are we still debating this, as we've heard before? Why are we have to repeat the messages of the Club of Rome and of Dennis?
Well, one thing is for sure, it's not for lack of evidence. Well, the report is now 50 years old. So evidence has been around for decades. So this is not about not knowing. So if it's not about not knowing, it must be something else. And I would say it's the lack of will to change, because this system has losers and has winners. And, well, as things happen, the winners are closely connected to the levers of economic and political power. So, you know, there's something that we tend to underestimate, I think, in this whole situation, is that this is really about power. And all this language about leaving no one behind and, well, let's move consensually towards the new economy actually denies the very existence of a conflict. I mean, there's conflictuality there, because indeed the extractive economy that we have winners. And indeed those winners are fighting tooth and nail to keep their advantages. I mean, we had votes last week in the European Parliament on phasing out free allowances for emissions,
yes,
which is just a symptom of the situation where we are. Well, you still have very powerful parts of the economy fighting tooth and nail against that. Because indeed they stand to lose. Because indeed, well, business as usual has winners and losers.
Yeah.
But the transition as well. And actually those who stand to lose the most from the transition are those who benefited the most,
yes,
of the extractivist economy that we are living. And if you deny the existence of that conflict, you will never solve it.
So how do we solve it?
Well, you need to build majorities for change. At a moment where the trust of the citizens in the institutions that are there to make decisions is severely eroded. We had elections in France last weekend. Well, every other French man or woman didn't bother to vote. And that tells you something about the lack of trust. So it's really a challenge to show, that indeed political decision makers can act with the common interest of society in mind. And we have to demonstrate that day in, day out to rebuild the trust. But it's only by doing that we will build majorities for change. But I still am a Democrat. I do not believe in a sort of enlightened elite who would do a revolution and bring good policies about, because we know where it begins, but we also know where it ends, usually. So we have to bring change through democratic means. But that takes a lot of convincing for citizens that indeed they won't be screwed, because of course they've been burned. I mean, we had a global financial crisis more than 10 years ago, and who paid the price for it? Well, the people, the less affluent people. And then we had the pandemic again, inequality rose. And well, they will tell you, well, we know how it works. When there's major shift, it's us, the ordinary citizens, the lower middle class who are going to be screwed again.
Yeah.
And they don't want this. This is why we had the Gilets jaunes in France.
Yes, and I was going to ask Aurore also about the Gilets jaunes. To come to that, actually, Aurore, because two things that you said, Philippe. One is we've just had elections in France, and we know where many of the disenfranchised did not vote. Could have actually also gone to Le Pen. We talked about disenfranchisement in the last panel, where actually communities often are disenfranchised, and the more they become disenfranchised, the more that fear-mongering grows, and the more they hold on to the existing economy, rather because they think they're going to be the biggest losers. So how would you respond to that from a position of, we know what we've heard in the Limits to Growth, we know that we have new economic models. How can we bring more citizens on the journey?
I think we need to redefine prosperity. This is what was saying Tim Jackson, Kat Prevost, Boy, Benaida. I think this is the main issue that we have. And if I can add something about what Philippe just said, if we do not manage to get rid of GDP and our obsession with growth, it is also, I think, because we have also kind of an emotional attachment to GDP, because GDP is very linked to material development that we had right after the Second World War, and people managed to live in bigger house. They could have a bath. Okay, this is something quite important. They could buy some food. They could go on holidays and so on. So we have a very emotional attachment to GDP. That's the first point. Second point is GDP is also very linked to credibility. When you are an economist, a politician, if you want to be serious and credible, you need to talk about GDP. I think this is also a problem that we have.
Yeah, we have to change that.
And
because there are many new economic models and economists who should be the ones who are more credible
today. And we need to move toward a donut economy, by the way. The third point is also fear. And this is very linked to what you say. I mean, when you tell to people that we are not going to refer to GDP anymore, that perhaps it's going to get down, get up, and we don't know yet, decrease, sorry, then people, they are scared because for years they were told that GDP means jobs. So the end of GDP, when they're losing that job, basically. So this is why I think if we want to bring people toward the ecological transition, we need to redefine prosperity. Because let's say the truth, it is a little bit scary to move into a new world, actually. We don't know how it will be. So I think we need to redefine prosperity and to show that the richest people are the ones who pollute the most, and that the poorest people are the ones who are suffering the most from the pollution, for instance. Social measure will be key to make sure that we can have the ecological transition, I think.
Yeah, Sandrine, if you allow me, just before I came to this discussion, I went to the laundry shop in our building. And what did I hear? The lady serving customers, she was talking to the previous customers. She said, would you not want to use your bag again? Because we are now going away from plastic because of the Green Deal. So the lady at the laundry shop, maybe she's influenced by the European Parliament, but anyway, so it's a beautiful example that there was no fear in her voice, and she just said, this is a new reality, this is how we have to act. And then she added to me when the other customer went that, yeah, okay, we have to look for ways to, how to we replace the plastic around these new garments, newly washed garments. But anyway, with lots of self-confidence for the Green Deal.
And that's what we need to build, right? Solidarity and transformation. And I'm going to turn to you now, my dear friend Maya, because you and I have had God knows how many conversations around how we can make sure that this is a multi-party movement, that this actually becomes a movement of decision makers together who show leadership and really do bring more citizens on the journey. You've been trying to do your best in Germany, and I would love to hear some of your thoughts as to how we can really create this leadership movement around the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package in other ways.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Sandrine, for bringing me in. I do hope that you can hear me more or less. It wasn't so easy with Dennis.
We can hear you.
Great. I think I would like to pick up on one of his points, or the maybe crucial point, and which is the short-termism and this feeling of it will get worse before it gets better. Because I think there's a lot in it that was also addressed now with this notion about will we lose out, and do we then trust that the better is going to emerge? And in this respect, I think really thinking about how could we recast some of the aspects so that we can actually see that improvements are possible if we let go of the systems that are currently working. And I think it is one of the things that I've tried to bring forward, and which role, it was pretty much given to science quite a lot of times now, next to the young people, is to say status quo is the worst possible option for the future. And to flip the burden of proof around, to say if you want to maintain a particular policy or a particular framework, you want to have to show what's the steering effect of it, because we still have so much in that rhetoric about, oh, don't disturb the markets, whereas we don't have markets in quite a lot of the places, because we need to break down on oligopolistic structures. Right now in Germany, for the first time, you can talk about these things, and the mainstream economists are coming in, by the way, to say, if we're not seeing huge subsidies for fossil fuels, which we're currently putting out because there's fear about too much or too high prices on energy. They're not really being transmitted down to the end of the customers. And there's a lot of talk about the windfall profit taxation and a lot about can we agree or accept that a crisis of this magnitude is being used by the ones that are sitting on the resources we all depend on because we haven't been fast enough with the change to renewables, that they really cash in on this crisis moment, and to really be very clear about how much this costs and how much we have to get away from subsidizing the status quo that is risking our future in order to be transparent about what is the cost of change versus the cost of maintenance. So really flip that burden of proof around, because we still have to argue whenever we are presenting alternative proposals only on the consequences of those proposals, and then benchmarking with the old ways of measuring progress. So the two go together with finding the alternative solutions and expressing what is being created in a beneficial way in the numericals, because they're so strong. I think Kate said it nicely with the images, but we still have a very numerical question or language to express whether we're on a good way or no. And this is why I think we have to get them into the measurements like the taxonomy did, like the value balancing or capital coalitions that are saying which are the valuable business models that help us create the green and the social, and then be even more courageous. And I've been talking with green and social entrepreneurs in the last 4 in Europe to say, if we're labeled the green and the social businesses and we still have to perform according to profit and GDP metrics, what is wrong with the 95% of the business that are then obviously asocial and brown? So stop making us justify why we're still, whilst being green and social, are beneficial for the economy, but go reverse and say everyone that does not have those positive impacts shouldn't be called an innovation or a business model for the future. I think we have to be much more outspoken about the cost of the status quo, because then we can look into something being a change that already gets us into the it's getting better, but only with that honesty about the disastrous existence that we have right now. And unfortunately, it is to a certain degree still in the models. We've seen how difficult it was to start acting on climate change and other issues that are not right in our face in their effects. We call it the prevention paradox, right? So you're not allowed to be that politician that says we should really go into structural change now before people experience the crisis themselves. And that was a bit the difference between COVID, but we still saw it there. It was very hard to do any initiatives towards lockdowns or something that were at the beginning of that curve, that exponential curve. But then when it was rising, in order to flatten it, there was some justification. So how do we bring foresight in? How do we make sure that we get the understanding about the longer consequences into the everyday, basically cost value or cost benefit calculations with which we're arguing what is the better political proposal? And then invite everybody in. You say, we're fine. I mean, right now we've had it with the renewable energies in Germany. They've been green for a long time. It was always the kind of Green Party thing. Now with the war, they're the freedom energies. The liberals have adopted that. And now we're talking about the Heimatenergien, which is more the Christian Democrats. So it's more the ones that were building here, the home energies, right? Because they can be put in our gardens instead of having to be imported. It can be whatever, because I think we do understand that if we're improving the way that we're doing things, we will gain quality. I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, also the ones that are very market orientated. They're really fed up by having to deliver mediocre product that breaks earlier just because of the price competition in international markets. So something like border checks adjustment, something like protecting the ones that want to produce higher quality output need to be the ones that are being championed by political decision makers and not the ones whose business models we want to let go of. Then there's more freedom. If we build back our environmental systems, I think the nature-based solutions movement, the global commons movement, all of those are very clear that we're only going to open up the freedom of human existence again if we're upping the base upon which we depend. And I don't know if you saw the CIPRI report. I think one of the most important lines in it was when they're researching about the age of risk, that cooperation is the new realism. Again, I think we have to be really stark on the narrative flipping, because it was always utopian to talk about cooperation. But it is, in the end, the only way that we're going to protect the global commons and a lot of the public goods that we've seen. And the last point I would like to ask us all in, how do we get from the quality improvements and the freedom improvements to something that would be maybe security enhancing? Because this worriness about falling behind, this worriness of not being able to have access to the primary services anymore is really strong. So how can we get into those positive framings of, if we build back the assets that we've had, if we make the engine better that works, so how we produce things, we will have outcomes that we can measure in a way that speak to people directly. And that's the JRC overview of a resilient society, which I think really allows for us for many intervention points where loads of different parties can find themselves in, to say, yes, we can do this better, and that will alleviate the crises. So be very stark on how and where we are here now, so that this notion of it's going to get worse is drawn down as much as we can, and then show quickly where we're going to win in on the projection of the longer term change.
Thank you, Maya.
I think this speaks to just the last one. The three motivators for people's activity is, the one is, this has to stop. Right? The moral convictions. Amartya then speaks about this. So this has to stop, like threatening our children's future. The other one is, wow, that'd be fantastic if that was possible. That's the engineers that are really trying to figure out how we can multi-solve and meet several of the environmental and social goals. And the third one is, this is why championing the ones that are already bringing out the solutions. I can do that too. If someone else did it, I can do that too. So if we do all of that three, I think we are going to be able to find programs where all the different parties can find their specialties, but not question the overall goal again.
Great. Thank you so much, Maya, and so much in there. And I'm going to come back to all of you now as reflections on what Maya has said, but also build in a little bit some of the questions that I'm seeing coming through the Slido. And trying to build now from the last panel into, hopefully, some thoughts about what the Parliament can do. And I know that, Philippe, you're organizing a very large conference next year to really bring together multi-party backing for moving beyond GDP. I think there are several things that Maya said and that you've all said that I really want to pick on right now. One is, how do we get through the current crises? So Ukraine in particular, but also COVID. When we know that this build back better, first of all, you can't build back glaciers. So building back better, unless it's bouncing forward and doing something completely new, is not going to work. So what are those short-term levers for you that are most important now? And how do we actually build that from a policy? That's the first. The second is that we've just finished our Earth for All new publication that's building actually on the limits to growth and looking at the kind of the Earth 4 model, which is system dynamic. And many people, including you, Heidi, have brought up the equity issue. One of the key issues there that we've looked at, we've had 5 turnarounds. We have to have really a clear turnaround around inequality, poverty, empowerment. You also spoke about empowerment is fundamental. And it's only that way that we can then address 2 very basic aspects of our society, food and energy. And hello, that's where we hear the crunch right now in terms of the Ukraine. So these 5 turnarounds are short, medium, long-term possibilities. We even know that we could put in, for example, a dividend scheme, universal basic dividend. We could actually create citizen funds. We've unpacked the type taxing products, as Maya says, and production rather than labor. This would avoid the gilets jaunes. So we know all of this. What is the next step, and how do we put it on overdrive at a time when we're in the midst of more conflict resolution rather than forward planning? Philippe, I'll start with you.
Well, to me, the most powerful lever that we have at our disposal right now, and the one with the most immediate impact, is the whole issue of taxation. How do we fund public services, so public goods, on what basis and with what goal? I do believe that our entire taxation model is entirely built on the extractivist paradigm. And this is what we need to change. And there, of course, the good side is that indeed it takes a majority in a parliament to change the taxation system. But if you want to do it at the level of the European Union, there you need unanimity of all 27 member states to do it, which is a bit more difficult. But indeed, this is where also we can recreate confidence with our citizens that indeed we are reducing inequality, that indeed those with the broadest shoulders are going to bear the brunt of the effort. This is where really you can prove it. You can prove it. One of the reasons why we had the Gilets jaunes in France is not so much that diesel prices were slated to go up, it's that this happened exactly right after another taxation decision, which was abolishing the wealth tax in France. And of course, the signal that it sends is, okay, we are going to make the lives of the 1% richest better.
Easier.
Well, easier. We are going to make them wealthier.
Yes.
And oh, by the way, we are going to make the life of ordinary French people worse in terms of income. And therefore, no surprise that indeed you had a massive revolt against that. But again, this is where we need to act. And as long as we are not shifting massively, reinventing our taxation system, we will not rebuild trust. And by the way, we won't have also the means for public investment. So to me, this is the most immediate level, because yes, I agree with Heidi that we have to make our democracies more participative, reinvent them, because I also don't believe that, you know, someone has the blueprint of a sustainable society and just society, and that we just have to apply it. So I don't believe in this concept of an enlightened elite of society that knows better than society what is good for society. I believe that the transformation can only be the product of collective intelligence and wisdom. But transforming our democracies is a process that will take a bit more time than changing taxation, which is why, okay, I say first things first, we have to go there, but I see an enormous reluctance by most governments to go there, because indeed this is where you will again shift the economic power potentially massively. And the wielders of economic power don't like it to be deprived of their power.
No, before I come to you, I've just heard that Dennis might want to say a few things. So Dennis, I hear you're still online. Did you have a final reflection that you wanted to make based on the conversation that we've been having? Can you hear me, Dennis? Okay, we have a bit of a technical problem. Maybe I'll turn to Heidi, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank Maya for mentioning this need of reversing the burden of proof, the narrative. And so, I mean, just today, we can ask that how so would it be wiser, more sustainable to label gas and nuclear green?
No,
we have a narrative which says that no, this is not the case. I just listened to the Norwegian Prime Minister in Finland, who said that they are going to produce 30,000 megawatt worth of offshore wind power, and that he's already in discussions with Germany, with the Vice Chancellor Habeck, about perhaps Norwegians could help the Germans to get rid of the dependence of gas, and especially Russian gas. So 30,000 megawatt worth of offshore wind power is like 30 nuclear power stations. Which would we prefer? So let's try to reverse the burden of proof. And then I think this question of taxation and incentives is really important, because, I mean, nobody would say anymore that it's just the four of us plus maybe 20% of the population who need to sort of struggle every day in the shop to get the most ecological options and give up car. No, we need a systemic change, and the incentives are really key, because a lot of people would follow if they had the right incentives. So I think we have to struggle here in the European Parliament for getting rid of this unanimity rule between the 27 member states, and I see that Aurora and Philip, we all as an institution, we agree deeply on that, because we want the EU to be able to make a change, because people also have shown some trust that the EU is the right place to try to combat climate change and global poverty, things like that. And then
Let me just check, Maya, that you're still on, because I don't see you anymore.
No, he went.
No?
I can hear you well.
Okay, super.
Okay, then one more thing is about these supply chains. Like now we see that our supply chains are broken and disrupted. And
unholy alliances and dependencies, my dear Heidi.
Indeed. So now is the moment when we can say that, look, you can indeed go for this heimat energy. You can produce your circular fertilizers instead of importing from Russia, you know, nitrogen fertilizer produced with a lot of energy, fossil fuels. So this is the moment of what I would say regenerative food systems. And maybe not only that, but the supply chain issue is a huge chance now to change things in a massive scale, in my view.
Kate really tested us on shifting from degenerative, extractive to regenerative. And Aurore, as also as an economist, I mean, clearly I assume that you started your thinking, which was much more kind of a career probably in normal linear economics. And now you've shifted, which is because we need more of this shift. How are you seeing what we've just talked about, in particular, again, in the context of these dependencies that we have? And coming from France, how do we work with the French population so that they realize that actually we won't have any more gilets jaunes if we move towards a well-being economy?
Well, I think that actually I will come back to taxation because it is definitely key. What we need is fresh money right now to invest. Because what happened with the yellow vest also is that we had this taxation that was decided by the government without any possibility of talking with them. The government alone decided of this. And then people were trapped because if they wanted to go to work, they have to fill in their car. And they had absolutely no alternative. And this is why investment is key, actually. We cannot have any incentive, this kind of stuff via taxation if we do not build any alternative right before. And right now, what we need is to invest, to have some public investment, just as Gentiloni said a few weeks ago, especially on renewable energy and this kind of things. And to do so, we need to have fresh money, and we need definitely to have a windfall profit tax on energy enterprises because they made a huge amount of money those last months, and this is not something we can tolerate, and we need, especially since we need some cash. So I think this is the priority right now: taxation, public investment,
and that
to
would
help
also
people
work on overproduction, of course, and so we would tax the bads and enable the goods, which we actually today, which was a groundbreaking day for those of us working on the taxonomy, we got the gas and the nuclear out of the taxonomy.
Yeah.
Heidi and I started my career, and you were a young member of parliament here in the European Parliament on the tax incentive scheme for cleaner fuels. And it really worked. I mean, if you wanted to buy dirty fuel that had lead and high sulfur levels, it cost you more. But actually, the cleaner fuel cost you the same thing that you would have bought the dirty fuel. Why don't we do that?
You know, for this we need to find and we need to build majority, just like Philip said right before. But I think right now, really, and I insist on this because we had all this idea of price carbon and this kind of stuff. And I think it was very useful, and it is very useful. But what we need right now is to invest. If we want to have some, to reduce our consumption of energy, if we want to change the way we consume, we produce, we need to invest. I think this is really the key message. We need to have a Green New Deal and a massive investment plan.
So I've got several questions, and Maya, I'm going to bring you in on this one for the next one. So one is a fee and dividend scheme. And in fact, I've got one person who's asked this over and over again, so I'm really going to ask, do we think we could pass a fee and dividend scheme across Europe? The other key question, I think this is a little hilarious. I don't know if it's a joke or not. It's whether we should expose the limits to growth in the History Museum of the European Parliament. And I would say That's lovely from a nostalgic perspective, but I would actually say, no, we can do that. Exactly. Not in the museum.
Table.
At
That's
the
why we needed
decision table, right here, smack, whenever we make decisions, we've got the limits to growth right there. And also in terms of our educational system, as we were saying, we've got now a slew of PhD students who want to do their PhD in new economics. So we should be making sure that we have those offerings for those students in different schools. So Maya, what are your thoughts on fee and dividend? And also, you're thinking also of how we can really translate limits to growth into something concrete. And anything else that you've heard?
The fee and dividend was one of the policy proposals that we had in 2019 in Germany, which was also actually linking between some of the economists' camps here to try to find an answer that would be socially progressive in its effects and still be able to raise the prices on the pollution, because often it is played out against each other. And I'm very grateful that you mentioned how the Gilets jaunes weren't against the environment, but we're just saying, look, I mean, this is crazy. You're letting this become very expensive whilst alleviating taxations on the ones that don't really need any alleviation in the first place. So I think this whole idea of how do we find the solutions that are socially progressive whilst allowing for us to make expensive what is downgrading our value in society, and to be really clear that it is a downgrading of the value, the downgrading of our future wealth in terms of the environmental that we have. And this is where it's come together. And it's been so surprising for us why it wasn't possible to still find a proper agreement on this. Now we've got an Energiegeld, which goes straight to the people to be able to purchase more energy when it gets expensive, but it's not tied to any rise of the CO2 price anymore. So we've lost the coupling between the social and environmental. But I think if we go into value, added value taxation, for example, VAT, we have in Germany such a weird system where meat, etc., and dairy are only 7%, and everything that's a vegetable is 19%. We do not prioritize repaired products, for example, over the ones that are produced cheaply and will probably break within a year or two, so that we have obsolescence built into them. So if we go at the steering effect of all the things that we have as taxation there, including the direct, indirect subsidies of 65 billion, into the fossil area still, we have so much wiggle room without having to completely change what it's going to cost to still have a completely different steering direction, that I think it is very worthwhile to always look for those instruments and how we can change them accordingly.
Thank you, Maya. I think I'm going to have to interrupt you because I've been told that I only have 3 more minutes. Let me bring in Philippe Lamberts and Aurore, and let me come back to you if I have the time. Sorry about that.
Yeah, actually, the energy subsidies that we are giving now are just fossil fuel subsidies. Yes. That's what we are. We are just feeding the bottom line of energy companies. So that's not the right decision. But indeed, fee and dividend is what we need to do. And in a way, the ETS2 proposed by the European Commission combined with the Climate Social Fund is a sort of first attempt at that. But we see already how much resistance it brings. Because, of course, the Climate Social Fund will never be big enough to compensate rising CO2 prices. So this is where you absolutely need the cooperation of the member states, because most taxation levers reside with the national or regional governments in Europe. And this is where you need the integrated approach. And we have a tradition in Europe where basically the European Union is a driver for climate action, and the member states are rather, pushing on the brake, you know? And we need to break this sort of deadlock. And a final point on what Maya said, just imagine that we would basically mandate that products have to have a warranty that corresponds to their, to the best technology in town. I mean, if a car can last 15 years, it has to be guaranteed 15 years. There, basically, it's not that you shift the burden of the proof, you shift the burden of the durability on the producer. On the producer. If the producer has to make sure that its product has to be guaranteed for 15 years, believe me, they will make it so that no repair will ever be needed, because the repair will be on them. And that is where you can really, with this is regulatory reform. It's not even taxation reform. Regulatory reform, you are shifting the market.
Yeah, and you get into a services market
Absolutely.
as well, which is what we
Absolutely.
need. And we need to create redundancy in the system.
And then they will tell you, yeah, but there will be less jobs if we produce cars that last longer. Yeah, but then again, no one says that every human being should work 40 hours a week for 48 weeks a year for 45 years in his life. I mean, if we need to work less to produce less, that will reduce our ecological footprint as well.
So I'm going to come to you, just a thought there. This brings us to exactly what Dennis said, because this then becomes the creation of a mature society that reflects actually the fact that we should think about universal basic income, that really the most important thing is that we underpin a mature society where the tissue of that society is vibrant, not necessarily, and that vibrancy is not just based on producing. That vibrancy is based on making sure that citizens are engaged and happy and thriving rather than surviving.
Be vibrant, but also to slow down the reason. I mean, we need to work less to make sure we can produce ourselves, we can rid of overconsumption and this kind of stuff. And I think something we can do at the European Parliament also is something that could seem a little bit symbolic, but that is key to me. Get rid of GDP each time we can in every text. Delete GDP.
That's much more than symbolic.
More than symbolic. Yes. I don't know. Replace it by economic activities and add each time that we can social indicator, ecological indicator, and the donuts, because this is what we need, actually.
Thank you. Maya, do you want one last reflection and then we need to go?
Yeah. No, I think we have a moment in time also just because we have such a proof now that we're socializing the costs and privatizing the profits wherever we look at in the climate response, in the finance response. And it's a pattern where I think we can be very clear that that has to change. And then it allows for a different way of thinking of interference. And the last point, the economic literacy, when we look at the inflation now being used by some of the austerity promoting parties to say, oh, now we have to cut down expenditures and we have to raise interest rates and not have the investments that were managed, especially public investments. Isabel Schnabel is one of the ECB directors, made a really crucial distinction I think we have to have in everything. And it talks to the short-termism. She said, A, we have climateflation. There are rising prices already now because of the effects of climate change, especially when you look at harvests and food production. So we can't forget the cost of inaction if we're talking about why prices change. And the next one is the fossil inflation, which is exactly the abuse of the market power in order to make prices even higher than they'd have to be. And that is another aspect where all the austerity measures are not ever going to help. And the third one is the greenflation, which is about the public investments or the public-private partnerships, where we should talk about ownership to be extended to citizens. That is a temporary thing, especially in the energy market now, because the upfront capital costs are high, but then we're going to be much better off in the future because there are no fuel costs, and obviously lots of the collaterals are going to be gone as well. But we have to differentiate and tell people that they shouldn't be falling into the old narratives that they're so stuck in our way of thinking that we fall into the threatening that comes with repeating them. So we do need that economic literacy.
We need that economic literacy, and we need to shift the narrative, as you were so well saying, Maya, to make people understand that actually the new narrative is vibrant, that the new narrative doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually going to work more and sacrifice, but actually you're going to start living a vibrant life, and that you're going to be a permanent actor within the economy in a very different way. I'm always fascinated, and then we will end by the fact that actually people say, but hold on. We have a vibrant economy. Well, first of all, no, we have an economy that no longer is in touch with people, no longer reflects economic activity, is over-financialized, so that actually if you fire 10,000 people in a company, your share price goes up. Now, what is wrong with that? You cannot tell me when we have the highest suicide rates, mental illness, and burnouts that we've ever seen in supposedly the wealthiest societies that people are happy. Thank you so much. I really hope that we will be able next year through this conference to waken people up. But in the meantime, there's a lot of work to do in this house together. And you can count on the Club of Rome to come shake things up with you. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to turn back to you now, Heidi, for some concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really encouraged about this initiative that you have undertaken, next year's conference, Beyond Growth 2023. And let's see that it will become a game changer to support already existing trends that need to be strengthened so that everyone learns to speak sustainability, which, by the way, you, Sandrine, you spoke about that we are treating symptoms. You mentioned that we have this CCC, we have COVID, climate, we have conflict. And we are only treating symptoms one bite at a time. So I'm confident that what you might need to do is to look for sort of integrated solutions, that we are treating the root causes and trying to solve several issues at one time. And I think Maya has given good examples on how you can do that. Then secondly, I'd like to say that this vision, I think it's important to talk to people who are not in these bubbles that work for ecological transformation, green issues. And my favorite topic would be to suggest that we need to go to vocational training to motivate, to give vision for people, purpose for the work that they do, because sustainability and beyond growth needs everybody's contribution. So how can we really bring everybody on board? And then the question of the regulation. Maya mentioned that now costs are socialized and profits are privatized. And I would say that what this House is also very busy with is important, that is corporate accountability. That it is not anymore acceptable that corporations get away with causing costs to global commons and privatizing the profits. So a lot to do, and it's been an honor to have the Club of Rome as a co-organizer of this 2-hour event, and especially Sandrine as co-president of the Club of Rome. By the way, you have really done a wonderful work of moderating these 2 hours. And we know that the conference that you are planning now is very cross-party, so it means that all the political forces that believe in future and see the European Union as the institution that can be solving them will be on board. No, I think it's been fascinating, and maybe just I will share a last personal memory. I wasn't 1 year old like Kate when the Limits to Growth were published. I was about maybe 16 or something like that, and I started writing about the food system of this globe, and I very much condemned this trend towards more and more eating meat and animal protein, because it would take 10 times more land and it would use 10 times more energy. So again, there is a topic that has been known for a very long time, and let's tackle this type of systemic issues together. So thank you very much for Dennis and everyone else who have been with us.
Thank you so much,
for
Heidi.
the MEPs. Good luck for the conference.
And let me also thank you for being my co-host, and for some of the incredible members of this House that really have shown bravery in trying to bring forward that courage that Kate really asked us to be courageous and move forward in sync towards this mature society. And I'd like to also thank EMAS and the work that actually the EMAS committee does here. I started my career on EMAS.
Good.
And actually my first environmental management system was in a nuclear facility in Belgium, Tihange. And the reason I bring that up is because through my career, I realized that actually most companies have emergency plans. And yet our planet continues to function without an emergency plan. And the fact that we are not declaring an emergency right now, that we are not understanding that climate, conflict, and COVID are interrelated, that we have not put in place the sound findings of the limits to growth and continue to have to repeat ourselves, as was said so clearly, is appalling. So my call to everyone today on the screen and coming to your point, those that we must reach that are not in our bubble, is the vision of the future is up to us. We need to stand up to the plate and get away from pretending that we're intelligent, put our egos to the side, and remember that we are part of this planet that we call home. A systems approach is the only way forward. New economic models and financial models that truly reflect the needs of people, their lives and their livelihoods. And it's the only way that we're going to get out of this mess. So I'm hopeful that before even your conference, we get some big decisions from the European Commission. I'm hopeful that with all of the incredible members of the club and so many others that are converted already, that we bring out a narrative that brings more people on the journey so that the populace understand that this is their vision as well as the Greens, and that we truly are, in the next decade, this decisive decade, able to show that we truly are wise. So thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, Philip and Aurora.